We have a couple of hymns in our hymnal that have a lot of verses. We sang one of them this morning, For All the Saints. It's such a wonderful hymn. But every time we get into one of these really long hymns, I love singing it. Every verse is good. All the words are good. But I laugh to myself because I think of that episode of The Simpsons. And I've probably mentioned this to you before, but it always comes to my mind. Where Bart takes the organist's music and replaces it with In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And they're singing, and Homer turns to Marge and says, didn't we used to make out to this hymn? And at the end of the hymn, the organist collapses in exhaustion from having played for 30 minutes. But it's such a good hymn, right? For All the Saints. And we sing it once a year on this All Saints Sunday, which in our calendar falls the first Sunday after November 1st. November 1st is All Saints Day. Many of us observed All Saints Eve, also known as Halloween, All Hallows Eve in the past week. And it's this constellation of saints' days and time of remembrance when we think about our own mortality, we think about our beloved dead who we see no longer, and we think in particular on this day about those who lived lives of heroic sanctity, who are now in the nearer presence of God. Some of whose names we know, like St. Bartholomew, and many whose names we do not know. The nameless host of people who are known only to God, who lived lives of heroic and amazing holiness in their gentle and small and big ways in whatever life unfolded to them. A few years ago, I was working in Uganda, and I went for a walk with a friend of mine. I was in southwestern Uganda, and we passed by a soccer stadium, an outdoor soccer stadium, and he said to me, there is where the Christians died like Stephen, praising the Lord under Idi Amin. The names of those people who have died are not marked on any calendar. They are not remembered in any special Saint Day service. But they are martyrs and saints to God who died with heroic sanctity and who lived lives of heroic sanctity and made the good confession when they were put to it. Now that is a remarkable way in which someone can exhibit holiness. But you know men and women in your lives, perhaps a grandparent or a great-grandparent or an uncle or a friend, who over the course of their life in quiet ways showed a deep connection to their God and lived life in such a way that when you looked at their life, you saw a glimpse into what the love of God looks like. That's what sanctity is all about. That's what holiness is all about. In other years on All Saints' Day for the Gospel, we read the Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel as we reflect on what does it mean to be blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. But in every third year, the lectionary puts in front of us this passage from John's Gospel about the raising of Lazarus. It's really a remarkable passage for us to think about as we think about our beloved dead, those whom we have lost, and what God is doing in our lives, and what it means to live a life of blessedness, or to strive to live a life of blessedness. Jesus gets word that his friend Lazarus, whom he loves, is sick. And he waits 2 more days before going. And as he decides to make the journey to go to Bethany to see Lazarus, his disciples tell him, you really shouldn't go there. They're plotting to kill you. If you go through this area, you're in danger. And he goes anyway. And he gets to Bethany, the village where Lazarus lives. And we get some of these most poignant encounters between Jesus and the human beings that are in his life. Mary comes out to him. Martha comes out to him. They're weeping. This is the story in which Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. We hear this passage in Lent. We heard it last year in Lent. And then Martha comes to Jesus, and that's where our gospel picks up today. Confusing the sisters. Mary comes to Jesus, which is where our gospel picks up today. And she falls at his feet, and she says one of the most poignant lines in John's gospel. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus has this reputation as a wonder worker, someone who has multiplied loaves and cured a man born blind and turned water into wine at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, and on and on. And Mary has heard about these healings, and she's seen some of them in Jesus' own ministry, and she wonders, why didn't you come when my brother was sick? Now he's been dead 4 days. In a few moments, Jesus will say to roll away the stone from the tomb, and the great objection which comes across best in the King James version of this story. My Lord, he stinketh. Right? The gospel passage here is telling us that not only is Lazarus dead, but he's really dead. And this is no time for Jesus to do whatever he's going to do. The time is past. If you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But Jesus prays, and we see in his prayer his total communion with his Father. He prays to his Father that those who are hearing him pray will understand. And he's not praying that God does something. He's going to do it. He's praying that the people understand that Jesus and his Father are one, and that Jesus' will and his Father's will are one will. And then he issues the great command, Lazarus, come out. One of the most amazing moments in Scripture. This is the 7th sign that John presents to us from Jesus' ministry. This is the last sign that Jesus will do before John's gospel turns into the narrative that leads to his crucifixion and death. This is the end of season 1, right? This is the season finale of the first part of John's gospel. Lazarus, come out. And the dead man immediately comes out of the tomb. And of course, we who know the story of Easter can see in this promise, can see in this sign, a foretaste of Jesus' own resurrection. Jesus takes up his life from his own power and comes out of the tomb. No one needs to roll the stone away for him. No one needs to unbind him. We hear about Lazarus' grave clothes in this passage. When we get to the story of the resurrection of Jesus, when the disciples go into the tomb, they find the clothes lying there and one cloth folded up like a pillow. No one needs to unbind Jesus because his sign at the end of his ministry is not a resuscitation, which is what happens with Lazarus, but a resurrection. And this sign points us to Jesus' resurrection. But it also points us to our own profound humanity. Jesus weeps for his friend. Jesus weeps at the grief of those who are grieving for his friend. And at this time of year, we are often remembering those we have lost. I know some of you have lost loved ones recently. Jesus weeps at the grave of his friend. It's a prayer that we pray in a funeral service. Lord, you wept at the grave of your friend Lazarus. Console us who mourn. The full humanity of Jesus on display. We think about our own mortality. We think about our own grief. We think about those whom we have lost, those whom we love but see no longer. And Jesus here shows us a foretaste of what is proclaimed in our second lesson today from Revelation, that there will come a time when God will wipe away every tear. And all of those whom we love but see no longer will surround the throne of God, who is the beginning and end of all things. This is the promise of resurrection that we receive in the gospel. It's what we mean when we say in the creed, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. We're talking not about Jesus' resurrection in that clause in the creed. We're talking about our own. I believe in the resurrection of my beloved dead. I believe that God will call all of us out of the grave, just as he here today calls Lazarus out of the grave. These grave clothes are such an interesting detail. When we think about what it means for us to be called out of the places in our life where we experience spiritual death, what it means to come out of those places still wearing grave clothes, still wearing things that remind us of death, that feel of death. How many of you have had a turn in your life where you've changed your life for the good, where God has called you into a place of hope and new life, and yet you find yourself still wearing grave clothes? You find yourself falling back into the ways of the tomb. What it means for us to grow in sanctity means for us to put away those grave clothes bit by bit as God calls us out into a new way of living, into what it means to be blessed or a people of sanctity. The last word in our gospel today is not Lazarus take off those grave clothes, but the community of people around him. Unbind him and let him go. We build each other up and we grow in lives of sanctity by unbinding each other and letting each other go. Lazarus does not remove his own grave clothes, but the community around him returns him to normalcy and life by taking away those things that stink of death that he walks out of the grave with and returns him to fellowship with them. This is part of the Christian vocation in community. When someone changes their life, when someone comes out of the grave, how easy is it for us to hold that person in a place of distrust, of shame, of disregard? We continue to hold people account over and over and over again, instead of unbinding them and letting them go. Returning people to fellowship with God and one another is the work of the community. God says the word, Lazarus, come out. We do the work. Unbind him and let him go. And it is the work of a lifetime that others do for us and that we do for others as we grow and grow in this life of holiness that we're called to. For all the saints. That's us in process. We will be around that throne someday where God says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, and wipes away every tear. And in the meantime, we do the work for ourselves and for each other of responding to that powerful call. Lazarus, come out. My friends, as we remember our beloved ones who showed us what the love of God is like, let's hear not just Jesus' command to you, come out of that place of death. He's calling that to you right now. Come out of that place where what gives life is not there for you. Come out of that place. But he's also giving a command to each of us to unbind each other and let them go. How easy it is to hold people's foot to the fire over and over and over again for mistakes that they have made, to hold them in bondage, to not let them go. If God has called you out of the tomb, it's time to be free. And that's what a life of blessedness looks like. And that is what the work of a community that is committed to following in the way of Jesus does for one another. Have a blessed All Saints, friends.